proper payments. The contractor, McDonnell Douglas, is threatened with major financial losses and may soon file claims. Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the remainder of my statement be printed in the record as if stated on the floor of the Senate.
Without objection, so ordered. Under the previous order, the senator from Alaska, Mr. Murkowski, is now recognized to speak for up to 15 minutes.
Mr. President, I wish the chair a good morning. I have some exhibits that are in the process of coming into the floor at this time, and prior to that statement, I would like to share with my colleagues the realization that last week we all supported the National Red Ribbon Week. I, along with the senior senator from Alaska, Senator Stevens, introduced legislation proclaiming National Red Ribbon Week for a drug-free America. The Senate saw fit to pass that last week. The week, as we know, focused on the nation's attention to the dangers of drug abuse and the benefits of a life without dependence on illegal drugs. I want to congratulate the work of the National Family Partnership, the volunteers, those dedicated to freeing our nation from the grip of illegal drug use, the sponsors, educational activities on the perils of drug abuse. In my state of Alaska, on October 25th, we celebrated with a kickoff of the week's events with a participation by the FBI and the Alaska State Troopers in the Anchorage Town Square. That was duplicated in other areas of Alaska as well. It was the beginning of a week of celebration of a drug-free life and awareness of the dangers of drug abuse. Communities all over Alaska participated in the activities. We have seen progress in the war on drugs. We've seen emergency visits reduced in our hospitals. Annual surveys of high school seniors show a decline. Statistics like these should spur others to work harder. I want to congratulate all those who have devoted so much time and talent to this important endeavor. Mr. President, furthermore, we're going to be introducing this week legislation to proclaim the week of National Family Caregivers Week from November 21st to November 27th. The purpose of the week is to recognize those who sacrifice their time and energy to the care of elderly patients, relatives, friends, and neighbors who need day-to-day assistance. The number of Americans 65 or older is growing dramatically. The number of frail elderly aged 85 and over is growing as well. Over 5 million elderly people have disabilities that require daily care. 80% of those elderly receive care from family members, often wives, daughters-in-laws who sacrifice employment opportunities and careers to provide that care. Their contributions help maintain strong family ties and provide an environment of caring and nurturing. These weeks, when the legislation sets aside recognition, really provides the opportunity for caregivers to generate the appreciation that's needed for their dedication and sacrifice. Similar legislation, Mr. President, has been introduced in the House by Representative Pat Schroeder. I would urge all my colleagues to co-sponsor this important legislation when it's introduced later this week. Mr. President, I'm going to take a little time this morning because I would like to take the opportunity and get the attention of this body to discuss a report entitled Leading Cultural Indicators. It was authorized by William Bennett and published jointly some time ago by the American Heritage Foundation and the Free Congress Federation. It's not a very long report, Mr. President, a mere 22 pages, but I think it's an extraordinary, good statistical portrait of the moral, social, and behavior conditions of modern America over the past 30 years. The American family, the study suggests, has reached a code blue status. Too many children are being raised today without the same level of parental care and attention that children in generations past were given. And I fear that children growing up today really lack the secure foundation that many children enjoyed yesterday. Mr. President, a personal experience my wife had not so long ago. She was gardening in her front yard just a few blocks from here when a car pulled up to the front curb. A young man leapt out of the car and asked my wife if she would phone 911 for an emergency. It seemed that the man's friend sitting in the passenger seat had suddenly become unconscious. Well, apparently he had a drug overdose. My wife ran into the house, phoned 911, and called our neighbor, who was a Capitol Hill police officer, for assistance. But within a matter of minutes, there was a fire truck, followed by 2 ambulances and 3 police cars. They revived the man, gave him a shot, which we assume neutralized the effects of the drugs. In the meantime, a neighbor from up the street came down and informed the officers present that she had witnessed the same car stopping further up the block. The driver got out and put something in the trunk of the car and then proceeded to throw an object down the storm drain. The officer checked the storm drain and could see a needle in a plastic bag. Because there was no paraphernalia found in the car and the police did not have a search warrant, they were forced to release the 2 men. Well, if you're upset, Mr. President, so am I. There were 6 rescue vehicles involved in this episode, some 10 persons assisting the situation. This drug addict cost hardworking taxpayers probably $2,000 at least, only to drive off and probably die another day in another area. All of this occurred in close proximity to 2 grade schools. This incident, I think, demonstrates the social problems we face and our inability as a society to effectively deal with them. What causes this breakdown, and what can we do as individuals and a society to stop it? A strong foundation through a proper home life is essential. Stable parents are the key component to a child's development and long-term success in life. Let me refer to the charts that I have, Mr. President. As you can see, this is a chart by the U.S. Bureau of Census, and it shows single-parent families and the increase from about 10% in 1960 to 1990, where it's just approximately 27%. So we've seen a tripling in the last 3 decades. 17 million children today live in single-parent homes in the United States. Single-parent families are at a disadvantage in terms of both time and finances. Approximately 90% of single-parent homes are homes without a father. Well, this is indeed unfortunate, but it's a reality in the society we live in today. 73% of children from single-parent families will be in poverty at some point during their childhood, while only 20% of children in 2-parent families will experience poverty. And 22% of children from 1-parent families will be in poverty 7 years or more, compared with 2% from 2-parent families. What becomes of children who do not receive a solid upbringing where the parent or parents do not provide the steady guidance and values? Well, unfortunately, Mr. President, many of them turn to crime. That leads me to my second chart. Here we show the juvenile violent crime arrest rates. And this source is the Federal Bureau of Investigation. It shows the growth of violent crime among juveniles from 1965 up through 1990. And as you can see, those are violent crimes arrest per 100,000. This is the fastest growing segment of the juvenile population that are involved in law enforcement exposures. The reality is juvenile arrests have quadrupled. More than 70% of juveniles in state reform institutions unfortunately come from fatherless homes. The Arizona Republic ran a series of stories. I came across a special report entitled Saving Arizona's Children. One incident reported particularly caught my attention. It was a 14-year-old girl named Roseanne Garcia. ran into her family's apartment and found her younger brother, Cruz, sitting on a sofa, shot in the face by another boy who had since been charged with second-degree murder. She struggled to help, but the wound was fatal. It was the second time that Roseanne had knelt by a dying boy. A few years ago, she witnessed a friend murdered in a drive-by shooting. Her father, Cruz Garcia, was gunned down during a quarrel last year, and she has since seen 2 other friends shot. Roseanne, who just had a baby, said she thinks it's weird that she has witnessed so much violence, but she says, "I'm kind of over it now." I think we only have to turn to the Washington Post today to recognize the significance of what this fear and terror means. On the front page today, we saw an article depicting young people who were planning their own funerals. Imagine that, Mr. President, planning their own funerals because they were fearful about the neighborhood they lived in. They saw so much death, terror, that they were fearful that they too would eventually be marked for death, and these young people were planning their own funeral. It's absolutely incredible. Let me refer to the last chart, and this is teen suicide rates. This source is the National Center for Health Statistics. Teen suicide rates per 100,000 among 15 to 24-year-olds. You can see in 1960, a rather modest but still startling rate of suicides moving up to almost off the chart in 1990. The rate at which teenagers are taking their own lives is clearly increasing. We've seen the suicide rate more than triple since 1960. Suicide is now the 3rd leading cause of death among adolescents, behind motor vehicle accidents and other accidents. I believe there is a direct correlation between the turmoil in the home and children venting their frustration and confusion in violence against themselves and others. I might say, certainly in our state of Alaska, we are not spared from these unfortunate circumstances. In 1990, 6 young Alaskans decided to end their own lives in the ultimate tragedy of suicide. So, Mr. President, as we address the responsibility that we have to those less fortunate, we have to recognize, first of all, that the answer is just not spending money. We spend more money than ever on social programs, and yet so many of our social ills seem resistant to governmental changes and resistant to cures. Government leaders have been treating the patient whom they know nothing about and using tools and procedures that have been proven to fail. Let's face it, government really isn't good at solving many of our social problems. In most cases, it shouldn't be involved at all. When it tries to control social problems, oftentimes it makes them worse. Government perhaps should have to take the Hippocratic oath of do no harm, quote unquote, before creating social policies. We might ask ourselves some basic questions. First and foremost, is this activity legitimately within the jurisdiction of the federal government? And if it is, what kind of behavior will this legislation invoke? Does it support or undermine families? Will it encourage or discourage individual responsibility? Will it provide effective assistance to those in dire need? Or will it be diverted to a bloated bureaucracy? The Alaska Supreme Court, Mr. President, recently adopted Civil Rule number 100 entitled Mediation. This was effective July 15th of 1993. This is an example of my home state evaluating the current law and assessing ways to utilize the law and its resources that at best will encourage rather than discourage, in many cases, family unity. Mediation may be one of the most effective forms. Society needs to heal the family wounds. It may not prevent the inevitable split, but it may make divorce, in many cases, less painful. Mediation can reduce the psychological costs of divorce proceedings, difficult ones. Children of adversarial divorcees are often the children who end up having difficulties in school or end up as juvenile delinquents. In some instances where conflicts may arise solely from the lack of communication and compromise, Mediation may even help families remain intact. The courts and the community, for the sake of families, must be willing to explore all reasonable alternatives to court-based resolution of family issues. The state cannot replace the family in cultivating responsibility, individual independence, self-restraint, and conduct. Mr. President, I would ask unanimous consent if I may be allowed to finish. I've got another minute.
Is there objection?
I thank the Chair.
Reserving the right to object, Mr. President, I will not object, but my understanding is that there is another unanimous consent for me to speak for 10 minutes, and then there's a third beginning at 11 o'clock for Senator Byrd. Is that correct?
The senator from North Dakota is correct on both statements.
I will not object.
Without objection, Senator from
you,
Alaska
Chair.
may conclude his remarks.
The state cannot replace the family in cultivating responsibility, independence, self-restraint, and the right conduct. These are key virtues which are essential to the health of a free and democratic nation. The best government, social policy, is a policy that encourages family life. It is a goal this Congress and our President must be willing to commit to. Finally, Mr. President, to restore the rewards and penalties of marriage does not require social engineering. Rather, it requires that the state stop interfering with the national forces that have done the job quite effectively for a long, long time. Mr. President, I would ask that the statement from the Wall Street Journal dated October 29, 1993, the coming underclasses by Charles Murray be entered into the record as if read.
Without objection, so ordered.
I thank the Chair, and I yield the floor.
Under the previous order, the senator from North Dakota, Mr. Dorgan, is now recognized to speak for up to 10 minutes.
Mr. President, in a couple of short weeks, we will be voting on the North American Free Trade Agreement. My office received a dozen or so of these booklets, as I'm sure did most other offices in both the House and the Senate recently. It's called NAFTA, Our Economy, Our Future, the North American Free Trade Agreement. A book that's done in beautiful 3 colors, glossy pages. It's expensively done, but appropriately so, because those who support the North American Free Trade Agreement have a lot of money. American corporations and others who want to access cheap labor in Mexico and sell back into our country. That's what this trade agreement's all about. They've got plenty of money to sell this agreement. The Mexican side has a great deal of money invested in this agreement and is selling it as aggressively as they can, and so too our corporate sector. They have a coupon for every state in this booklet, and I thought I would simply demonstrate the absurdity of the claims for NAFTA. The coupon for my state of North Dakota talks about the importance of Mexico and Canada to us with respect to trade. Here's our coupon. North Dakota, $229 million annually in North Dakota exports to Canada and Mexico. That means they say 7,800 jobs. They want you to believe that's what's riding on this vote on NAFTA. 7,800 jobs. Well, if you look at it, what you find is of those 7,800 jobs, 7,300 of them have nothing to do with this subject. 507 jobs, even if you believe those figures, 507 jobs in North Dakota have been created as a result of exports to Mexico. Not 7,800, 507. Big difference. Well, the reason I mention this is part of the glossy carnival of information that's been sent around this town to support NAFTA. I serve on the Joint Economic Committee, and we did an evaluation of the major studies that have been cited about NAFTA. Chairman Dave Obey over in the House of Representatives had a press conference on it. I thought it was interesting because just yesterday again I saw the Labor Secretary say 19 out of 20 studies support us on NAFTA. 19 out of 20 studies. Get the 20 studies. I'll show you how phony that is. Of the 20 studies, 8 are the same study, except 4 were the preliminary drafts and 4 were the final drafts. Let me give you some other examples of those studies. 10 of the studies begin by assuming that no investment will be diverted from the U.S. to Mexico. This entire treaty is about diverting investment from the U.S. to Mexico. It's about the U.S. investing in Mexico. 2/3 of new investment in Mexico now comes from the United States. At least that much will come under NAFTA. So if you decide by your study that we will study this assuming no investment will occur in Mexico from the United States, of course you're going to show a positive impact. 7 of the studies begin by assuming that the U.S. will experience no net change in its employment. Well, if you're asking the question, will NAFTA cost us lost jobs? And then start your study by saying, assume there are no lost jobs. How phony is that? How absurd are these economic studies? I mean, I used to teach economics, but I've overcome that experience, as I've told my colleagues before, to go on to lead a productive life. Economics, it's sort of psychology pumped up by helium. And you find somebody do a study for you, and you say, show us how good NAFTA will be for our country, and assume there will be no U.S. net investment in Mexico, and there will be no change in our employment base. That's the absurd approach that's used these days to sell this trade treaty. This treaty at its roots is about American enterprises that want to access cheap dollar-an-hour labor in Mexico and sell back into our country. Of course it's going to cost us lost jobs. Of course it is. International Trade Commission said, well, it's only going to mean lower income for those who are unskilled. We asked them, well, which Americans are unskilled? Turns out their definition of unskilled is 70% of the American workforce. The economist Lester Thoreau came to our committee. I said, will this mean lower wages, generally speaking? Only for 2/3 of the American workforce, he said. Well, that's a pretty significant problem. Instead of all of this nonsense, the glitzy corporate sales job and the information from the administration that takes, in my judgment, phony numbers from phony studies that start with the prediction there will be no jobs lost or no investment in Mexico, let me read for you some letters from North Dakotans. I mean, maybe, just maybe, that ought to be the final word on trade treaties. They know that we have had a decade of bankrupt trade policies that have weakened this country, eroded our job base, and in my judgment, damaged our future. Randolph Nodland, he farms out in western North Dakota. He's the person who wrote to me on behalf of the North Dakota Resource Council. We oppose the North American Free Trade Agreement. Several thousand North Dakota jobs will be at risk if this passes. Many workers in North Dakota currently receive too low a wage. Creating an atmosphere making it attractive for companies to move their operations to Mexico will allow wage levels to further deteriorate. If NAFTA passes, farmers in all 3 countries will be going neck to neck to outproduce each other to make up for losses in commodity prices. And under the proposed NAFTA, the whole democratic process as we know it is being abridged. Myron Yanzer, North Dakota AFL-CIO. Why would a state that has a severe outmigration of young population and a state that spent $20 million plus and millions more by cities and counties to create jobs be in favor of NAFTA? We give up our right to international judicial processes in regard to trade disputes. Instead, we get an international panel that has no allegiance to the people we represent. We've seen this process at work firsthand in the wheat dispute with Canada. Mark Fromke, American Federation of Grain Millers in North Dakota. American businesses, he says, will take advantage of low Mexican wages and labor standards to blackmail American workers to keep their plants open. Here, then, they will have to work for less. Also, the sugar industry in North Dakota and Minnesota, an industry that generates $1.25 billion in revenue, will be undermined by NAFTA. Wade Schaefer, Bismarck, North Dakota, the Sierra Club. No effort was made to close loopholes that leave U.S. environmental laws vulnerable to attack under NAFTA. NAFTA won't allow the public to have a say when U.S. environmental laws are challenged as trade barriers. Tim Cornway, up in northeastern North Dakota with the bean growers. Canadians should be prohibited from using their freight subsidies to ship beans across the United States to Mexico to avoid damage to U.S. bean producers. Charlotte Meyer, North Dakota pork producers. She says the North Dakota pork producers cannot support NAFTA in its present form. Granted, there's some potential for exporting pork, but a vast majority of our pork producers are also grain producers. So without some changes in NAFTA, we can't support it at this time. Karen and Craig Scott in Bismarck wrote to me, "We worked hard this past legislative session in North Dakota getting bills passed to protect our state from unethical waste dumpers. Will these laws protect our state, or will they be considered as interfering with interstate commerce if NAFTA is passed?" Erlis Paul, Bismarck, writes to me, "Please vote no on NAFTA. Anyone who thinks this will not take jobs from our already hurting labor force had better think again. It's big business and their way of avoiding all unions and employer taxes, OSHA, environmental regulations, and more. Incentives to stay in business in this country should be granted. When jobs are gone, who's going to have the money to buy the goods and services produced in Mexico?" Larnie Worth, a registered nurse in Moorhead, Minnesota. "If I would negotiate for my union in the manner the U.S. negotiated for NAFTA, I'd sooner be out of office," she says. Linda Grenz, Dickinson, North Dakota, wrote to me. Linda writes about multinational companies that set up plants in poor nations to pay workers less than required for nutritional and human needs. She said it all adds up to greed. Modern-day business philosophy is skim companies, embezzle, up at the top of the power for profit. This off-balance mentality has degraded our lifestyle and weakened our economy and added to our hardships in the marketplace. Well, I could go on from Edwin Schaefer and Lawson Jones and Bert Holvig. I'll put those on the record. My point is, the people out there in the country know full well what's going on. And that's why this isn't selling. This is a trade treaty that does not yet have the votes to pass it in both the House and the Senate. So a lot of worrying and nervousness and hand-wringing going on. Why? Because the members of the House and Senate who go home and listen to folks back home understand that they know over a cup of coffee what's happening. American corporations want cheap labor to sell back into this country, and this is about greed and profit. It's not about advancing this country's economic interest. This could have been, in my judgment, a thoughtful discussion of fundamental trade policy for this country. Instead, in my judgment, it has become a thoughtless discussion of glitzy carnival-like booklets that promote phony numbers from phony studies telling us that a phony treaty is good for this country. I hope, Madam President, that in the next 2 weeks, as the House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate vote on this treaty, we will decide not that we want to close our borders, we want our borders to be open. Not that we don't want to compete, we do want to compete. But instead, we don't want any longer trade treaties that are not fair. We insist, we demand on fair trade so this country can advance its economic interest, create jobs, and move ahead with a sound and strong economy. Madam President, I yield the floor, and I suggest the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Madam President, I ask unanimous consent that the order for the quorum call be rescinded.
Without objection, so ordered.
Madam President, talk of a balanced budget constitutional amendment is again in the air, and the proponents are on the verge of claiming victory before the Senate floor debate begins. S.J. Res. 41, which has been introduced by Senator Simon and other senators, if passed by Congress and ratified by the states, would require that the federal budget be balanced annually, whether the economy is strong or weak, unless 3/5 of the whole number waive the requirement in any 1 year. Here's the section that I've just talked about, Section 1 of the Constitutional Amendment, a proposed Constitutional Amendment. Total outlays for any fiscal year shall not exceed total receipts for that fiscal year. That means every year, unless 3/5 of the whole number of each house of Congress shall provide by law for a specific excess of outlays over receipts by a roll call vote. So what this is saying is that total spending for any year, for every year, shall not exceed the total receipts. They must balance each the other, unless 3/5 of the whole number of each house, which in the case of the Senate would mean 60 votes. 3/5 of the whole number, not 3/5 of a quorum, not 3/5 of those present and voting, but 3/5 of the senators who are elected and sworn. Unless 3/5 of the whole number of each house of Congress shall provide by law, which means it has to pass both houses and be signed by the President, for a specific excess of outlays over receipts by a roll call vote. Can't be done by unanimous, well, it might be done, no, it can't be done by unanimous consent even. It has to be by a roll call vote. Well, Madam President, this is nothing more than a precatory expression of pious hope. Read what it says. Total outlays for any fiscal year shall not exceed total receipts for that fiscal year. And Mr. President, God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. But man is not God. And to say that outlays for any fiscal year shall not exceed total receipts for that fiscal year does not make it happen any more than would be the case if a constitutional amendment were added stating that the forest primeval shall be restored by the year 2000, or that the environment shall be pure by the year 2000, or that the nation's rivers shall revert to their original pristine state by the turn of the century. We could just as hopefully bid the Mississippi River cease its flow toward the sea, or that the mighty Missouri remain chained at its original sources. Saying it will not make it happen, even if it is the Constitution that says it. This is an empty exercise in voodoo budget balancing. And senators should know better than to disfigure the face of the Constitution with warts filled with wind and encumber that Constitution with ropes made of sand. This is a feel-good amendment. It simply states that total outlays for any fiscal year shall not exceed total receipts for that fiscal year. They shall not. Why not just have a constitutional amendment that says the members of the Congress shall have spine? Having the constitutional amendment say that the members shall have spine doesn't guarantee that they'll ever have spine. Merely saying it will not assure its performance. But how good we can feel. We can vote for that. Makes us feel good. Go home and tell the people, we voted for a constitutional amendment to balance the budget. Makes you feel good. That makes me feel good. I'm almost tempted, or I would have been, before careful consideration of the matter, to vote for that. That's what we've been waiting for. Well, the amendment states that the Congress may rely on estimates of outlays and receipts in its implementation of the article by appropriate legislation. This is to be found in Section 6, and I read Section 6 in the proposed constitutional amendment to balance the budget. Quote, the Congress shall enforce and implement this article by appropriate legislation, which may rely on estimates of outlays and receipts. Madam President, total outlays and total receipts cannot be known at the beginning of any fiscal year. All that we will have are the estimates of outlays and receipts for any year. Actual outlays and receipts frequently vary from our estimates by billions of dollars. We do not know what the outlays are until the Treasury issues the checks. We don't know what the outlays are until the Treasury issues the checks at the end of the fiscal year, on September 30. And even then we don't know. They may vary. So we really won't know until about October the 15th, 15 days after the whole fiscal year has passed. We don't know what was spent until the monthly Treasury statement is published on the 15th business day of October each year. Now remember, we're talking about balancing a budget in a fiscal year. Every fiscal year. Every year. Unless the Congress, by a 3/5 vote of each House, waives that requirement. Well, how do we know how much the total expenditures are? How will we know how much the total revenues are? We don't know until the fiscal year is gone. But even that figure that the Treasury issues in its statement, published on the 15th day of October, is subject to later revision as more data become available. The point is that no matter how hard we may try to project outlays and receipts, we have invariably failed. Receipts are often lower than expected, and outlays are often greater than expected. And nothing in this amendment cures that problem. It does not say that at midterm or quarter term of the fiscal year, we will take a new look and readjust and correct our course without provisions of enforcement. The mere hortative language only creates expectations which are bound to fail of accomplishment. One of the 10 Commandments says, "Thou shalt not kill." And yet we go on killing. So merely saying it doesn't make it so. We're told in the book of Leviticus, "Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself." Yet we go on loving ourselves without even knowing the name of our next door neighbor. S.J. Res 41 is not self-fulfilling. Both the proponents and the amendment itself remain mute about the course that the proponents would advocate to achieve a balanced budget. The amendment itself doesn't advocate the course. The proponents haven't advocated the course by which a balanced budget is to be achieved. If the amendment is ever added to the Constitution, and we hear that it almost has the votes now to pass, it would require a 2/3 vote of this body and a 2/3 vote of the other body. It won't go to the president. Constitutional amendments don't go to the president for him to sign or to veto. They go directly to the people. And then the people ratify or refuse to ratify the proposed amendment. And if 3/4 of the states approve the ratification of the amendment, then it is riveted in to that document. And if this amendment is ever added to the Constitution, the American people could wake up one morning and find that nothing had changed. Then what? Larger spending cuts or tax increases would thus be required in slow growth periods. That's what this amendment will do. That's what it will cause. Larger spending cuts or tax increases would thus be required in slow growth periods than in periods of robust growth. Exactly the opposite of what is needed to stabilize a weak economy and prevent recession. The amendment, therefore, not only risks making recessions of greater frequency, greater depth, and greater duration, but by mandating a balanced budget by FY 1999, a year for which a deficit of $223 billion is projected by CBO, or within 2 years following ratification, whichever is later, would also impose restraints on the economy in excess of those entailed in the recently enacted budget law. A double whammy. Hit them twice. A double whammy that can stifle economic growth and cause unemployment to soar. The 3/5 waiver provision. The 3/5 waiver provision would prove ineffective, as most recessions are already underway before they are recognized as such. So the recession will already be upon us before it is recognized as such. Sometimes a recession is not recognized as a recession until a month, 2 months, or certainly subsequent months have passed. Well, then how are we going to waive by a 3/5 vote? This requirement, so as to provide a law for a specific excess of outlays over receipts, how are we going to do that? Moreover, by mandating such severe and sudden budget reduction, S.J. Res. 41 would curtail public investments in roads, airports, waterways, education, civilian research, and other infrastructures needed for short and long-term economic growth. To say nothing of its disastrous effects on our nation's defense planning and military strength. Now we hear it said, we ought to balance our budget. The American people have to balance their budgets. Every family has to balance its budget. The states balance their budgets. The federal government ought to balance its budget. Well, let's take a look at that. Businesses borrow to finance the purchase of high-tech and other equipment. Businesses borrow to modernize plant and equipment. If they don't, they're going to fall behind, and they'll ultimately go out of business. States borrow. My state of West Virginia borrows. Other states borrow to pay for roads, schools, and other capital projects. Families borrow. My able assistant here is a fine man. He has a wonderful family. Now, I cannot ask him a question here, but I bet if I would say that if I were to say, do you have to borrow? Does your family have to borrow? Did your father have to borrow when you were growing up? Well, families borrow to buy what? To buy an automobile. What else? To buy a home. I know, because I've had to borrow in my lifetime to buy a home. My wife and I have worked hard to pay off the mortgage on the home. We borrowed the money. We didn't balance our budget, did we? No, we borrowed the money. And we paid over a period of years the principal and the interest on that borrowed money. Don't let it be said the federal government should balance its budget like every family in America balances its budget. Families, only few families are able to balance their budgets. Families borrow to buy a farm. I remember my coal mining foster father bought a 26-acre farm over in Mercer County, West Virginia. Years ago, back in the 20s. He paid $1,800 for it. Did he pay it cash on the barrelhead? No, he borrowed it. Had to borrow the money. Had to get someone else to sign a note for him. So we borrow money to buy a farm equipment, or to finance a college education. Many people borrow money to finance the college education of their sons and daughters. Unless 3/5 would vote for such federal borrowing on an annual basis, the federal government would be denied the methods that most businesses, states, and families and local governments used to finance investments critical to their proper functioning, economic prosperity, stability, and well-being. So don't let anyone ever kid you that the American family balances its budget. Doesn't do it. Oh, there are a few families that can afford to do it. But they're more fortunate than most. Now let's take a look at the limit on the debt. Under SJ Res 41, the debt limit cannot be increased unless 3/5 of the whole number of each house votes to do so by roll call. Increases in the debt limit often muster only a bare majority, and then with difficulty. We've seen the debt limit increased here in this Senate upon occasion by a majority of 1 or 2 votes. And then it was like pulling teeth. What would happen if Congress failed to increase a debt limit? The Secretary of the Treasury would be forced to delay payments of interest and principal on maturing federal debt. Federal employees would be sent home. All but essential federal government services would shut down. That what we want? Some may say yes, but not for long. Federal expenditures would cease. Federal contracts would be violated. And if not checked immediately, a financial crisis would sweep over this country and would shock the economic empires of the world. It would amount to an economic earthquake. With such dire consequences, the temptation would be great for a 2/5 plus 1 minority to refuse to vote for a debt limit increase unless some demands were made. Minority rule would not be a pretty sight. The amendment raises serious equity problems by requiring more votes in each house to raise taxes than to cut funding for programs. This is an inequity that would favor large corporations and the wealthy who receive government benefits through tax subsidies over the average American households whose benefits come through programs. I again point out that the amendment provides no instructive steps as to how the goal of the balanced budget is to be achieved. It simply says that the Congress shall enforce and implement this article by appropriate legislation. Ha-ha, there's the answer, my friend Paul Simon just arrived in time to hear the answer. Just in time. Let me repeat it. This is how we're going to balance the budget. The Congress shall enforce and implement this article by appropriate legislation, which may rely on estimates of outlays and receipts. In other words, the burden will still be right here, where it is now, and downtown at the other end of the avenue. Burden will still be on the Congress, working with the President to make the tough decisions and bringing about the implementation of the amendment. Now, why go through the constitutional process? We're allowed 7 years under this amendment for its ratification. Why go through those 7 years? Why go through this constitutional process of having 7 years and the American people, through at least 3/4 of their legislatures, approve the ratification of this amendment? Why go through that process? Why not make the tough decisions now? Congress and the President already have the power. This doesn't give the Congress and the President any more power than they now have to balance the budget. Why not make the tough decisions now? Congress and the President already have the power to work toward a balanced budget. It's only a matter of biting the bullet now and making the hard decisions, and we don't need a constitutional amendment for that. It will be deja vu all over again. To adopt a resolution providing a constitutional amendment will only give us a few more years on which to pat ourselves on the back and say to the people, we have adopted a constitutional amendment to balance the budget, which really means absolutely nothing. Zero. We will just be putting off the hard decisions until the constitutional amendment is ratified, and then it will all be right back in our laps. The bottom line is that it will take courage to solve this problem of monstrous deficits, and the adoption of a constitutional amendment will not give us any more spine than we already have. It took courage to pass the reconciliation bill, which provided for 5 years of budget reduction. And the President, if I'm reading the press correctly, the President had to go over to the other body and make a lot of promises over there in order to get the votes to pass that package. Every senator supports a balanced federal budget. I support a balanced budget, and I want to lower the federal deficit. But the answer must not be to perform a lobotomy on our nation's most sacred principles of checks and balances and separation of power, the foundation of the Constitution, simply because we're frustrated. The solution to the problem will take time, and it can only be found through courage and leadership. And President Clinton has tried to provide that leadership. He had to wage efforts night and day to get that one bill passed over there, to reduce the deficits over a 5-year period. A vote for this constitutional amendment is a vote for delay, at least until the year 1999. It is as phony as a $3 bill, and I've never seen one of them. And I won't ever see this budget balance through this amendment. It's a cop-out. It will straitjacket the government in recession, and it will force us to overload services and programs on the states. And in the end, it will open the way to litigation and the invitation to the courts of this country to become the super offices of management and budget and involve themselves in the legislative control over the purse. It will enthrone the judges of this country with the power to tell the people where the money will be spent and how revenues will be raised. These judges are unelected representatives of the people. This would be taxation without representation, and we fought one war over that principle a little over 200 years ago. If this amendment is adopted, we will have sold a bill of goods to the American people. And they'll end up with a deficit problem potentially worse than the one we now have. The current cynicism toward government will spread like the leprosy. Where? To the Constitution. What this really is a prescription for minority rule. This will become a government by a minority. The proponents, and I have great respect for them. I have a great respect for Senator Paul Simon. These men and women, the co-sponsors, must surely believe that what they're doing is the right way. I just said that man is not God. I can't look into their minds and hearts and say that they're not just as sincere in supporting this amendment as I am sincere in opposing it. But they'll claim that an overwhelming supermajority of the American people are saying that they want a constitutional amendment according to the polls. What the supermajority of the American people are saying is that they are concerned about the fiscal situation that confronts this country. The polls ask, do you favor a balanced budget amendment? The people say, yeah. But the polls don't ask the questions, would you like to have your taxes raised? How about that? Would you like to have Social Security payments cut? How about that? Would you want to see veterans' pensions or veterans' compensation cut? How about that? Where do you stand on that? These are the questions that ought to be asked in connection with any poll that sounds out the feeling of the American people regarding a constitutional amendment to balance the budget. This constitutional amendment does not save 1 penny, nor does it cost 1 penny to anybody. It does not cut any program by 1 thin dime. It is painless, odorless, tasteless, easy to swallow. It's not only a quack remedy, it's a bogus remedy. Mr. President, Section 5 of the resolution provides the Congress with the ability to waive the requirements of the amendment any time that a declaration of war is in effect. I continue to read it. The provisions of this article may be waived for any fiscal year in which the United States is engaged in military conflict, which causes an imminent and serious military threat to national security, and is so declared by a joint resolution adopted by a majority of the whole number of each House, which becomes law. Mr. President, if the nation found itself in a situation so serious that the Congress passed a declaration of war, then certainly the Congress would exercise this waiver. No doubt about that. However, as a practical matter, the United States has been involved in 3 wars and numerous other military engagements over the past 45 years, and none of them have been conducted under a declaration of war. Section 5 provides for a waiver of the balanced budget requirement if the Congress passes a joint resolution declaring that the United States is engaged in a conflict that poses imminent and serious military threat to the national security. Now, this would appear to provide the flexibility required. But it is easy to envision scenarios where this scheme would break down. If a military emergency develops late in a fiscal year, and the President, as Commander-in-Chief, takes immediate steps to address the crisis, such as happened in Operation Desert Shield, then how would the funding be affected? Even if the Congress passed a resolution supporting the President's initial action, the situation might not clearly meet the test of, quote, imminent and serious military threat to national security. The Congress might be deeply divided on the policy, with only a narrow majority supporting the President's action. Let us remember that the resolution authorizing the use of force in the Persian Gulf passed the Senate by a vote of 52 to 47. If a situation did not meet the test of Section 5, and 3/5 of the Congress would not vote to waive this amendment as provided in Section 1, then the nation could find itself with a Commander-in-Chief forced to operate in violation of this constitutional amendment. I am sure that is not the intent of the proponents of the amendment, but unfortunately, it is a very possible outcome. Do you have that? Madam President, 3/5 waiver, a 3/5 requirement. To waive the requirements of Section 1 have the real effect of diluting the power of the small states of this country. And I hope that the rural states, the smaller states, will take a long, hard look at this provision. We're going to have to balance this budget, come hell or high water, in any and every fiscal year. Recession, depression, or no. Unless 3/5 of the whole number of each house of Congress shall provide by law for a specific excess of outlays over receipts by a roll call vote. Now that dilutes the voting strength of the small and medium-sized states in this country. It puts into the hands of the largest states vast power, bargaining power. Let me prove it to you. I'll take only 6 states. How many votes would be required to defeat any waiver? It only takes 2/5 plus 1 vote of either house. The Senate might unanimously support a waiver of Section 1 in a given year. In the Senate, all the states are equal. Thank God. This is the only forum in this government in which all the states, large states, small states, middle-sized states, little states, are equal. Little West Virginia, equal to the mighty state of California. West Virginia has 3 votes in the other body. California has 52. All right. 2/5 plus 1 of the other body. That's where the voting strength of the small states would be diluted. There are 435 members of the other body. 1/5 is 87. 2/5 is 174. 2/5 plus 1 is 175. So all that is needed to block the waiver of this Section 1 would be 175 votes. I'll name 6 states that have 177 votes. New York, California with 52. New York with 31. Texas with 30. Florida with 23. Pennsylvania with 21. And Illinois with 20. Added up, 177 votes. California 52, New York 31, Texas 30, Florida 23, Pennsylvania 21, Illinois 20. Well, we could substitute for Illinois with 20. We could put Ohio on there with 19. So let's substitute Ohio for Illinois. 19 votes. Now we've still got 176 votes. And remember that 175 will block the waiver of Section 1. Well, let's don't substitute Ohio for Illinois. Let's substitute Ohio for Pennsylvania. Put this up there. Substitute Ohio for Pennsylvania. Now how many votes we have? Take off Pennsylvania with 21, put in Ohio with 19. We hit it right on the nose, 175 votes. So there's 175 votes. 6 states have outvoted, by virtue of the provision in the proposed constitutional amendment, have outvoted the other 44. Now, how do small states feel about that? The big states can just line up and say, now look, you give us this, we'll give you the votes. If those 6 states stood solidly, they could say to any president, they could say to the whole Senate, they could say to the rest of the members of the House, think of it, we won't budge unless you give to us this or that. All right, you small states, puny little 3 votes from West Virginia. And the other 44 states can read it and weep as well. Mr. President, Madam President, the small states had better take a good, hard look. And the senators, like Robert C. Byrd, who represents small states, had also better take a hard look. Because my state of West Virginia and the other body won't stand a chance. In here, yes. We can say, as Fitzgerald did, come one, come all. This rock will fly from its firm base as soon as I. We can say that. His name wasn't Fitzgerald, but it's another Irish name. It'll come to me later. But they can't say that. My little state can't say that over in the House. Small states, the people of the small states, the newspapers in the small states had better take notice. You're going to be left out of the bargaining. Well, it would only be in an extreme situation, or in theory perhaps, that 6 states like that would line up as they're lined up on the chart. It's possible. Well, let's don't say 6 states do it. Let's say 10 states do it, or 15. The small states will be penalized under this amendment. Make no bones about it. Now, what about the argument that 49 states have some type of statutory or constitutional balanced budget requirement? So why shouldn't we have a balanced budget amendment to the federal Constitution? We've heard that, we've heard it, and we're going to hear it again. This argument is simplistic, perhaps interesting, but really not relevant. The states, unlike the federal government, are not required to raise and support armies, not required to provide and maintain a navy, not required to provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States. Nor do they carry the responsibility of conduct of international relations or fiscal and economic policy for the nation. Moreover, there are fundamental differences in federal and state fiscal and budgeting structures. Balanced budget requirements for states generally affect operating budgets but not capital budgets, whereas the federal government operates on a unified budget. Operating and capital budgets are not separate and distinct here, as my state capital is located. The proposed balanced budget amendment to the Constitution would require the total federal budget to be balanced, including capital investment, pension funds, and operating expenditures every year. Furthermore, balanced budget requirements and practices at the state levels leave much room for evasion, so that not everything meets the naked eye. Revenues and expenditures are often shifted from one fiscal year to the next. Off-budget agencies are often resorted to. Program and funding responsibilities are shifted off to county and local governments. Short-term borrowing, intermediate-term borrowing, and borrowing from pension funds are common. At the state level, much state borrowing is made through off-budget, non-guaranteed debt instruments on which they are often required to pay higher interest. The states are in debt. And you hear the governor say, we balance our budgets. Mr. Reagan used to say, well, we balanced our budget in California. The states have it. He said, the states have it, Mr. Bush said. They balance their budgets. They don't. The states are in debt. They incur bonded indebtedness. They borrow money for highways, schools, prison facilities, soldiers' bonuses, unemployment relief, rural credit systems, recreational and health facilities, and so on. Mr. President, should the amendment be finally grafted onto the Constitution, and were it to fail of enforcement, and it would likely fail in view of the fact that it would still require members of Congress to summon up the courage to make the hard choices and tough decisions, and I dare say they'll be no more ready to do so then than they are now, the Constitution would be demeaned and cheapened. What would we then have done to the fabric of the great Constitution? We would have a government operating outside the legitimacy of the Constitution, and that great document would then be under a cloud. Let us not forget that once an item is written into the Constitution, once an amendment is riveted into that Constitution, if it fails to meet the expectations and hopes of the people, then the people's faith in the Constitution and in their government will once more be dashed. And it will require a number of years to repeal that amendment in the Constitution if that should occur. If the people see the balanced budget provision of the Constitution being avoided, it will only be a matter of time until other constitutional articles and amendments will also be violated. If this provision can be avoided and violated with impunity, why not extend the violations to the First Amendment or to the Fourth Amendment or to the Fifth Amendment or to the Eighth Amendment or to others? Madam President, I will have more to say on this subject at another time. My time has expired.
The senator from West Virginia has 1 minute remaining.